Hello everybody and welcome to another video. It's been like 3 weeks. I'm really terrible at this, but I've been building a new room, sort of, construction on my house and whatnot. Putting up some doors so I can have some quiet in this house, in this study, so that I can actually do videos and not have to wait for, I don't know, 10 o'clock at night to do something when I'm tired and ready to go to bed. But anyways, I've been thinking about this one for a while because I found it interesting that somebody like Tim Pool, for example, would say that there's an academic definition of racism, and then there's the dictionary definition of racism, and then there's the perceived notion of racism. And I think it boils down to that a bunch of people have their own definitions that they want to work from in order to define racism and then use it in their advantage. So this is almost a appeal to the dictionary fallacy. However, the appeal to the dictionary fallacy is kind of backwards. So it says that there's only one real definition for a word, and therefore the dictionary is the source of truth for the definition of said word. Racism, for example, is defined as the prejudice, I guess you could say, of different races and thinking that one race is superior or inferior over another. So this is the classic definition of racism that most people accept, except for social justice idiots. That racism is essentially thinking that your race is superior or inferior to another. Race realists, for example, will cite the bell curve study and show that, yes, intelligence is a quotient or a factor of success, and therefore certain races being smarter than the other are naturally superior to one another. What's funny is you're talking about an average of an entire population. When you do a sample size of the largest study of intelligence, for example, they did 250,000 people, I believe, close to 250,000. It was really, really close. And it was across the board, same study for everyone. I have multiple issues with the way that intelligence is approached to begin with, because we have about a 15 to 20 year development cycle when it comes to psychological development. Puberty hits around 12 to 15, depending on male or female. And there's a lot of contributing factors that can make you smart or not so smart. And the problem is with even when they tested it around the age of 7 to 10, that's 7 to 10 years of development that could have influenced the potential intelligence of an individual. So there's one problem. The other problem I don't see very squared well is the differences in education among different societies. For example, South Africa isn't going to be having the same educational system as the United States. The United States does not have the same education system as the UK. Hungary does not have the same educational system as either one of them. I mean, they're all different approaches. The one that's most mathematically inclined, and it also aligns with their language actually, is like the Chinese. So of course they're going to do better on problem solving because it's kind of part of their culture. And I think there's a big component in that, but you know, that's a discussion for another time. The real focus here is that redefinition of word. And so from the University of Missouri, we run into a doctor named, what was her name? It was first introduced by Patricia Biddle-Pavda is her name, in a 1970s book, Developing New Perspectives on Race, an innovative multimedia social studies curriculum in racism awareness for the secondary level. Now, she is a doctor of psychology. So it makes sense that she would study the human condition of sorts. She's also an ardent feminist, and she comes from the University of Michigan that brought us this little gem right here.
You're not doing your job.
It's our right to walk forward, isn't it? I believe it's my right to walk
Well, hi, media. Can I talk to you?
No, you need to get out. You need to get out.
No, I don't.
You need to get out.
I actually don't.
All right. Hey, who wants to help me get this reporter out of here? I need some muscle over here.
In case you are wondering, that person was fired. I'm pretty sure everybody kind of knows that already. But this is also the University of Michigan. The stuff like this is rampant there, and it's been rampant for quite a while. This lady wrote this book in the 1970s when feminism was at its peak of writing crazy shit like the toxic masculinity based on studying prison inmates, which is an erroneous study to begin with by doing it that kind of a sample size. Talking about 2% of the human population that commits the most atrocities, and you're going to base that and then generalize it to the rest of the 98% population? Or, well, of males anyways. I mean, we're half the planet, but you get my meaning. But no, she developed the new definition that somebody has termed as an academic definition, which I flat reject because it makes no sense academically either. And that's to claim that prejudice plus power equals racism. And the way they apply this, it's really a part of critical race theory, which is not an actual theory. It's no way an explanation of anything unless you assume that everything's a social construct, including human development. Therefore, this kind of makes sense, but not really, because it doesn't reflect upon actual human behavior. Nonetheless, taking prejudice and then applying power makes it so that the majority of anybody that holds positions of power, therefore, are necessarily racist if they hold any prejudicial views whatsoever. So this could also apply to someone like Don Lemon, for example. His reach, his outreach, his power is very extensive. He's known for giving out fake news and conspiracy theories over stupid shit. Of course, he flat out says that it's conspiracy theories, but then he talks about them like they're actual theories or some shit. He's really stupid. But he also has a very big obsession about other people's skin color and race. Talking about the black community, for example. And I watched one of his segments and counted 15 different times that he brought up race in the conversation. That should tell you something, that he values race. So if we're going to make this academic, and we want to work from a definition, I think I'll borrow from Peter Boghossian when he redefined faith to be pretending to know what you do not know, assuming that something is truth without any evidence, kind of the theme of my channel, the axiom principle, where you pretend something is a universal truth, everybody should know it, does not require evidence, but actually it's not true at all and requires a surmountable amount of evidence, religion being the most obvious. So I'm going to propose a different definition. So this is not an appeal to definitions, but a more of a philosophical approach to better define racism in the most broadest sense that we can clearly define a racist intent or racist action. And I think it's actually a little bit from the feminist critical theory perspective of prejudice plus power, although I would drop power. And then I also borrow from the definition, thinking that one's race is superior or inferior to another. But if we combine these two, we can define racism as something along the lines of race is holding the racial characteristics of one's own race or another race as having value, and then comparing values between two races, as if they're significant indicators of morality, of potential, of ideological thinking, or any other immutable trait which is not associated with actual racial features, biological features, or something along those lines. So, for example, there is a clear difference in facial structure, bone structure, melanin content, and other characteristics like that. Physical characteristics between a white person and a black person. It's fairly obvious. I mean, anybody can look and go, yeah, that guy's black, or yeah, that guy's white. The ones that are mixed breed, you can kind of see both, and you can see pieces kind of fit together. Facial structure, hair's really curly, something like that, right? These are facial demographical features that go with each race, and they're very biologically driven, right? So these features, combined with placing a value associated with the race that goes with the features, as if the value had any merit. So, to give an example, since people like to rag on white people that we have privilege, for example. Now, this is an assumption based on race, where the color of our skin places higher value than other people's race, other people's skin tone, saying that we have extra privileges that others do not have in our society because of our skin, that we're afforded benefits of, say, not getting shot by cops, even though the data is completely the opposite. Stuff like that. So any privilege, the perceived privilege that we may have, and anybody that actually holds this view in the new definition of racism, where to say that race is taking an immutable characteristic that is distinguishable biologically, demographically, and then placing value upon that in comparison to other races. Either they have equal value or they do not, in other words. And asserting that claim. Saying that white people have privilege, for example, would then be racist because it is an assertion that the white skin has value and that value is higher than other races based upon their view of what is valuable to a race. It's like a moral argument, but directed toward the value of people. You're assuming that my race, my skin, whatever, has more value than others. Therefore, I have privileges that others do not and aren't afforded. Now, this would also, I don't see that this could potentially have a slippery slope, to be honest. Now, if you think about it any which way, that would mean that in order for one to be racist or a race realist, one must place value upon race. So this would also lend to the philosophical approach, the metaphor of colorblindness that everybody hates because they think it's racist. That's because they hold race to have value. That the different races, and it's obvious to see that there are different races. I mean, it's a biological, obvious adaptation to environment, and that's really all it is. It's just an adaptation to environment, not necessarily that people are smarter or not smarter. It's just that they're more adaptable to hot climates, and, well, white people came out of the Ice Age, for hell's sake. So we're more adaptable to cold climates, and honestly, it's probably true. The South is killing me. But anyways, this would also assume that the race of individual people is therefore held in some sort of value system, a moral value system, a merit value system, however you want to frame it. If you went into cognitive science, putting values in a moral system is the way one can describe which values or which morals have more intrinsic value, personal value, than others. So I can't help but point out at this point that anybody that thinks that they love the color of their skin, or that their race is sacred, or that they need to uphold their race, or they think other races are privileged or underprivileged, overrepresented, underrepresented, what have you, are therefore racist because they hold race to have value. When in actuality, at an individual level, not talking about the IQ test alone, but individual level, there is real problems with some of the behaviors of certain races, for sure. But that's not everyone in that race. And to assume so is to place a stereotype. Now, the way stereotypes would play into this race definition is to assume that that race holds that stereotype. But here's the kicker. So if we go back to the colorblindness, the metaphorical assumption to say that I see your race, I just don't care. I see that you're black. It means nothing to me. So what? What does your black skin do for you? Make it so you don't get sunburnt? Great. I wish I could have that because I don't like turning red and then back to white. Kind of hurts. It burns. It stings. It really kind of sucks. I mean, I can go after getting sunburnt, I can go take a cold shower and still feel the heat radiating off my shoulders. It's rather ridiculous. However, I don't have that adaptation. It sucks to be me. And I probably never will, obviously, because I can't mutate in my short lifespan. It's just not possible. My kids, however, have the benefit of being mixed race, so lucky them, they go out there and get a tan. It's absolutely not fair, but it is what it is, I guess. Anyways, if we take the definition of colorblindness and we apply it into, or not the definition, the metaphorical approach of colorblindness to say that race as a descriptor, as a value system, has 0 or equal value. But if you put all races at a value of 0, then they are all equal value, meaning they have no value. Then we can move to the assumption that that person is incapable of racism, based on the fact, if they truly hold this position, mind you, I mean, this is far-fetched in our society. A lot of people, I think, do have some prejudices for one or the other, and it may be from lived experiences. I mean, there's plenty of people that have race problems. They are genuinely racist. I mean, we wouldn't have these calling people up because they don't have a permit to sell shit. I mean, who gives a fuck, to be honest? And if you're only doing it because it's a little kid and you don't like it and they happen to be a race that you're not, chances are you probably have some prejudice in there that's ridiculous. And maybe you hold some race at value. Like, you assume that they're lesser value than you. So chances are, yeah, that's kind of racist. But that also can go the same way. If you value your race above others, you love, I've heard chants, for example. Actually, let me just give you this clip. Now, as you can see here, that they're saying they love the color of their skin and they love being black. They obviously put value upon their race. Their race is valuable to them. So when you approach these type of people, they do not comprehend the concept of not having a value system centered around race, because they do. So for you to assert that you hold no race at value means that you hold their race at no value, not that you hold your race at no value as well. And this is where they get lost in the conundrum and assume that you're talking about, well, you just don't see my race and that makes you racist. They don't quite understand that holding no race at any value means that you don't give a shit what race anybody is. And it's hard to get across to people that indeed hold race as a valuable thing, as a core value of some sort, that either they hold it in high regard or low regard, comparable to other races, and that's the only way it can have value. Any moral discussion when you're talking about the merits of value in a moral transaction, certain morals will have more value than others. And this really kind of dives into some of the cognitive science craziness, but essentially you're talking about, like, you may value, if you have kids, for example, you may value your kids more than your own life. However, do you value your wife over your kids? If you had to choose between your children dying and your wife dying, that moral conundrum would cause you to make a value judgment. Which one would be more valuable to you, your children or your wife or husband if you're a female? That value decision will reflect upon your core values in that moment of time. Same thing goes for race. If you're in a situation where you are put into a position where you have to make a moral decision where value of a person's race has an impact upon a decision, the chances are that you hold some prejudices there. And that may be true, that you do or don't, maybe based on historical experience. Who knows, right? You could even think that the certain race is absolute scum. That does make you racist in this new definition. That having any moral value based upon immutable biological characteristics commonly known as race is racism. So I thought I'd throw that out there because, you know, social justice warriors like to redefine things in order to fit their narrative, and oftentimes what they'll do is they'll redefine things so far that it pretty much fits to their narrative. But I think this redefinition, also aligns with the dictionary definition, because you're talking about believing that immutable characteristics of race are, you know, basically skin color and maybe some facial features, and that one race is just superior or inferior to another. That is essentially applying a value to the race, either to be more or less valuable, and that includes your own. So my recommendation to all of this is to not put any value on anybody's race, ever. Don't bring it up. Don't have a conversation about it. What point does it make? Is it demographical information to make a larger point about generalized society and that there's a clear and evident problem in a certain behavior pattern and a certain demographic of people? Yeah, but how's that going to get fixed? Seriously. How about the race realism of IQ? There's plenty of problems with the whole approach to it to begin with, but I mean, there's some compelling evidence to say that certain races are more or less intelligent than others, and that's on average, but that doesn't reflect on individual levels. You can have absolute geniuses and you can have absolute morons in every race. So depending on the size of the demographics, and if those demographics were all equal, meaning they got a sample size equal to each race, there might be some compelling information in there. But otherwise, I don't quite buy it because of the indications and the timing and the test is consistent across the board. It's a very generalizable test. It's probably one of the best things we're able to measure. But you're talking about the development of culture plus influence plus environment plus 7 to 10 years of actual mental development based upon living conditions. Maybe they didn't actually drill in their head logic, for example, for 7 to 10 years, and others did. Maybe it's a part of their culture, like the Chinese, for example. The first thing they learn in their language is math. They learn the numbering system because the rest of the language is pretty much built upon that. At any rate, I thought I'd run this by you guys and see what you think. The redefinition of racism to equal holding the immutable characteristics of anybody's skin color or other biological features of having any value whatsoever. That's going to be my definition of racism going forward. It aligns with the dictionary. It kind of aligns with the prejudice plus power. There really doesn't need to be a power structure involved for anybody to be racist, because anybody can exert power over another depending on if the person allows it or not. The person that put this thing forward also says that she's taught leadership. Well, if she knows anything about leadership, leadership also requires followers. So you can either allow somebody to lead you down a road, or you can be a follower down that road. Oftentimes the mob is the one that leads. And for social justice, they believe in mob rule. So see where that gets you. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this one. Hoping with my new study walls and my doors and all that, I'll have it quieter so I can actually do real videos. And I don't have to stay up all night to do them, which would be nice. I got a list of like 80 plus things I want to talk about, and I've had 0 time to do it, which is insane. But anyways, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.
Well, lad, I'm going to show you some of my kung fu. That's called hitting the head.